Welcome to the NoPo podcast, your home for non-political news, with your hosts, NoPo founder Vera Gibbons and media commentator Mitch Roschelle. NoPo, news without the noise.
Welcome everyone to the NoPo podcast. We are just coming off a major snowstorm that pummeled the Northeast. This was the first nor'easter of 2021. 12 inches of snow in a lot of areas, 24 inches in other areas. Kind of a crazy time. And now we've got a cold snap across much of the country. And the groundhog says 6 more weeks of winter. I'm Vera Gibbons, and I am in Florida, where I am joined by Mitch Roschelle, who is also in Florida for the remainder of the month. And John Iannuzzi is holding down the fort in the cold Northeast pocket. Hi, everyone.
New England.
You're New England?
Connecticut.
Yeah.
Oh, Connecticut.
Connecticut is New England. Yeah.
Why was I thinking you were not in Connecticut? I was thinking you were in New York.
And again, as Mitch would say, I don't want to get too granular, but there's a cutoff in Connecticut, and anything south of New Haven, I guess, Mitch, would you say? People probably consider themselves New Yorkers.
I would say New Haven's probably the cutoff. The technical cutoff for Red Sox versus Yankees is New Britain, by the way.
That far north.
The halfway point from Fenway Park to Yankee Stadium. I don't know if that changed when Yankee Stadium moved onto the other side of 161st Street. However, it's probably still in New Britain, the exact halfway point between Fenway Park, and Yankee Stadium.
To me, the biggest thing that changed allegiance was when the Sox started winning. After 2004, it's amazing how many Red Sox fans emerged.
Well, you know what? The Red Sox are one of those teams like the Dallas Cowboys, and I'd say the Yankees are in that basket too. Michigan football, Notre Dame football, maybe UCLA, that they have the word nation after them. I would say the Lakers are like that, the Dodgers, where people are wearing the garb and rooting for the team, even though they're not from that place originally. And I think the Dallas Cowboys probably made that happen when they became America's team back, 30 years ago. So, by the way, that panting is not me. That's Charlie. If the listeners are trying to figure out, wow, Mitch is in Florida and he's completely out of breath, what happened? No, that's Charlie.
I don't want to go out of order, but since you just brought that up, I have to tell you that we have a listener on YouTube who is starting to time mark the spots where Charlie makes appearances.
Really?
or you apologize for your dog. So I was looking at a video from a week or two ago, and it's like 3 minutes, 40 seconds, dog.
Well, you know what? I think when we were first talking about this podcast, the three of us, and we were trying to figure out what we wanted it to be, we wanted it to be something where we were sort of bringing the audience into our lives, because I think our lives coping with this pandemic is not that much different from everybody else's. And we've spent a lot of time talking about the foods we eat, the shows we watch, how our lives have changed as a result of the pandemic, while we do it against a backdrop of what's going on in the news. So many of those stories are influenced. These stories wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for the pandemic. So maybe
a reminder to everyone that we are non-political news. I have to remind Mitch sometimes too. We are NoPo. We are news without noise. You get enough noise every time you put the TV on, every time you go online. Too much noise. So what we're trying to do is bring our listeners the best mix of non-political news headlines that we like and that we think our listeners would enjoy. Last week, we talked about the GameStop stock madness going on. And now, and maybe Mitch, you can comment on this, investors are turning their interest to silver. You want to explain that one?
Well, here's what's interesting. And I made this prediction actually last week with our friend Charles Payne on Fox Business Network, where I said when these retail investors that were chasing, and this is a great topic for later in the show for our guest Lindsey Bell, who will be on, who's a market strategist and a contributor with CNBC. But that's a tease for when Lindsey comes on in a bit. But when the retail investors were chasing these stocks that were potentially overvalued at the levels that they got to, but there were short investors betting that they would go down, that they were trying to squeeze, I said that trade was going to get a little tired with stocks. And I wondered if it would leach into commodities. And the commodity that I thought it would potentially leach into was silver, because silver prices are considerably lower than gold, and they generally lag gold. So if gold prices are getting run up in the market because of investors around the world thinking that because of global instability, they should put their money in a hard asset like gold, silver gets sort of bought up later when gold prices get too high. There's also an industrial use, or a series of industrial uses for silver, one of which is it's used for its antimicrobial qualities. You didn't think, Vera, I knew so much about silver. The other thing that silver is used for is it's in solar panels. So with this whole shift towards more green energy, silver was getting a little overbought, and there were some investors who were actually shorting silver. And there was a shortage of physical silver as a result of some of this market dynamic. And I thought that the next thing was going to be silver. And I predicted it a week ago. I bought it in advance of that. What I didn't do was sell it because I got greedy. So I'm now sort of back to where I got in. But I think you're going to see some of this craziness that took place with GameStop and some of these names take place in the commodities market, which will be even more esoteric than talking about short selling and buying puts and so forth. So more fodder for when we talk to Lindsey Bell later in the show.
Yeah, and Lindsey can also comment perhaps on, I saw a piece that Jane Wells did, one of her colleagues at CNBC, about you have these thieves now stealing catalytic converters from cars for the precious metals. And I thought that was an interesting piece. And they always give Jane sort of the fun, Lindsey can comment on this, but they give her sort of the fun stories. She's out based in California, and she has a really good sense of humor, and she's really good at putting these packages together. But so the metals, there are some metals that are used in converters. I'm learning a little bit about the car industry. And it's a critical emissions component. But what these thieves are doing, because these are desperate times and because there's all sorts of cars just parked on the streets because no one's going anywhere, is they are stealing these converters because of the metals. I mean, they're making a quick buck. And it's just a matter of, like takes them a few minutes to just remove the converters and boom, bang, easy money. They're under the belly of your car and they're stealing them in the middle of the night. That was an interesting piece. Did you guys see it?
I didn't, but I do have a piece of Jane Wells trivia, which I'm curious, since you've known Jane a long time, Vera, if you know this. She was in a sitcom, as a cameo. Do you know what sitcom it was?
I think it was a Seinfeld.
She was in the final Seinfeld. Yeah.
I knew that. Oh, wow. Good. See, I knew. I have little trivia in the back of my head.
She was the reporter standing outside the courthouse, reporting on the four, the Fab Four from Seinfeld, because they were arrested. So in any event, little Jane Wells trivia for those.
She still gets like checks for like $4 every year or something.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
I think I know that too. Oh my gosh. I know too much small little piddly stuff, but yeah. So Jane Wells is a great reporter. She's been with CNBC for years. And this was just kind of like a fun piece. Apparently, people have been stealing these converters for years, but now there's just been an uptick nationwide. So if your car sounds extra, extra loud, perhaps it is because you are missing your catalytic converter. FYI.
Maybe something, that was a thing back in the day when people used to steal. And maybe one other piece of that is, let's not lose sight of the millions and millions of folks who are out of work through no fault of their own and have fallen on hard times. And we're seeing an uptick in crime as a result of that. It happens that people steal copper and other things in periods of, crime because of need. So that may be also contributing to it, that there's a cause, and catalytic converters are becoming more valuable because some of those commodities that are in there are.
I saw somewhere that the 2 of the metals used in catalytic converters are worth more per ounce than gold. But so I don't know, but probably enough talk about converters, right, Mitch?
Yeah.
All I know is that copper brought down. There was a scrap metal theft ring within City Hall in Bridgeport, Connecticut recently, and air conditioned units. Yeah, copper is still a thing.
Huh.
Mitch, who are you texting?
Can I make No, I'm looking at the rundown of the show. Normally when I'm working from home, I have 2 computers. So I'm trying to keep track of the show rundown, and then I'm clicking the links that Vera has embedded in it because that's how good she is. John, one of the things I promised the audience we would do this week is read some reviews. And I was also checking iTunes to see if we had any, but I think we have some on YouTube, correct?
Well, what I told you, the most important one was the fact that someone is now cataloging your dog's appearances on the show. The other, which was a recurring theme, and it came from 2 different people, is that people appreciate your review of everything that took place with GameStop, but they don't totally understand it still. And it's amazing how deep into this people can get and really not grasp what happened.
Well, then we'll do this. When we bring in Lindsey Bell in a few minutes, we can start with that question and let Lindsey explain GameStop in her own words, because clearly I failed to do it in my own. And I'll explain who Lindsey is in a bit. Vera, Super Bowl, what are you doing for food for the Super Bowl? I know when this airs, the Super Bowl will have been over. So us chit-chatting about Tampa Bay versus Kansas City and all that stuff is just going to seem very mundane. But
I thought they were calling it Tampa Bay. They were calling it Tampa Bay after Tom Brady.
Oh, good. But Derek Jeter and Tom Brady. I mean, Tampa has just got too many goats running around there. But who do you like for the Super Bowl? But what do you like for food for the Super Bowl?
Well, first, let me say I have some friends down here who are going to the Super Bowl with the Glazer family, who they own the team. So they're flying a bunch of people down. I'm kind of jealous I didn't get the nod to do that, but I did tell a friend of mine, if anyone cancels last minute, I could go. Otherwise, yes, I will be eating at home, probably nachos and all the stuff, wings, all the stuff that everybody else is going to be eating. But yeah, this will air after the fact. So I'm thinking that Tom Brady will have his next big victory under his belt, and he will be celebrating. I hope.
All right. Johnny boy, what's the vegan diet for the Super Bowl?
Believe it or not, what I want to do, and I'm lobbying the 2 people.
Tofu wings? Is that what you're having? Tofu wings?
I'm going to admit this. We had a vegan meal that was prepackaged that was so bad a couple of nights ago that it still lingers. I still don't feel right. It was just terrible. The outside of it was like an armadillo shell. It was rock hard. What is that?
No, it's sunscreen. I bet you I'm just waving sunscreen. No one can see this because this is audio only, but I bet you the vegan food's about as tasty as when you get sunscreen in your mouth.
Not all of it, but I got a bad hit, Mitch. I got a bad hit. So what I'm doing though is I'm lobbying the 2 people that I'm watching the game with to hit a New York City landmark for takeout to bring back, and that's Vincent's on Mott Street in Little Italy. I would love to get a plate of pasta with their hot sauce, sans meatballs for me, but yeah, I would love to hit up Vincent's on Mott Street.
That sounds good.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Wo Hop on Mott Street for Chinese food at 4:00 in the morning when you are just about hungover from drinking the night before.
That is, by the way, the only place where I've ever had my car broken into.
On Mott Street?
Yeah. They hollowed out the locks. Like they must have used like a pneumatic drill, like in No Country for Old Men.
What kind of car was it?
It was a van, and it was my buddy had some people visiting from DC, and all their luggage was in the back.
Uh-oh.
Bad news.
Yeah. So that all went away. You just
welcome
with your insurance
to
company.
New York.
Yeah.
That was their initiation.
Well, I don't know how to make this segue other than the fact that, John, you used the word welcome. So I'm going to use that word as our pivot to welcome our guest for this week's edition of the NoPo podcast. Lindsey Bell, who is a stock market expert, and she's now with Ally Financial. And we just found out that she moved to North Carolina. We will find out where in North Carolina. But she's part of this craze of folks leaving big cities and moving to rural or suburban America in places like North Carolina and Tennessee. It seems like a theme, and Florida, where Vera and I are right now. So without any further ado, welcome to the NoPo podcast, Lindsey Bell.
I always like to applaud because it's like we get such great guests. Yay.
All right. I'm excited to be here.
The reason why our guests are so good is because we pay our booker so much money. That's why.
I was just say you didn't pay me. I'm just
we don't pay our guests, and I'm the booker, and I don't get paid either. But and by the way, look, I'm only up to the B's, and look what phenomenal guests I'm getting with Lindsey Bell.
Well, that's because Mitch, you know everybody.
According to a review, that's another message that John got. So, Lindsey, you broke this on us in the break before we started the show. So tell us about your move to North Carolina. Where in North Carolina, and how's it going? And one thing I'll tell you, when I drove to Florida, that was last Sunday, it was snowing all the way up to the North Carolina border. When we crossed from Virginia to North Carolina, there was still snow on the ground in North Carolina. So tell us where you are and tell us how it's going.
Yeah, so I moved to Charlotte in July of last year, and I'm probably 5 or 10 minutes right outside of the downtown area, which they call it Uptown down here, which has been something that I had to get used to coming from New York City. I'd spent 15 years there. I grew up in Pittsburgh, so I've been a little bit all over, and I actually spent a very short stint in Cleveland too. But so far, Charlotte has been really good. I haven't gotten to explore as much as I'd like because of the COVID situation. But everyone's super nice down here. We have some awesome neighbors. We feel grateful that we got into the housing market here when we did, because prices in Charlotte have just been through the roof. And Mitch, as you know, you and I have talked in the past a lot about interest rates and the housing market, and, the interest rate situation is good, but the number of houses, the inventory on the market is down substantially, and prices just keep moving higher because of all that.
How did you happen to settle on Charlotte?
So I work for Ally, Ally Invest, and they are headquartered in Charlotte. Well, technically they're headquartered in Detroit, but all the executives sit in Charlotte. So I was traveling down here every week, Monday through Friday, pretty much Monday through Thursday or Friday. And I just felt like I was living out of a suitcase, which I know is Mitch's thing. Like he used to.
I used to.
But for me, I was just like, I don't know. I don't know how you did it, Mitch.
My trick to business travel was I never lingered. There were people who would linger. And what I would do is I would leave as late as I possibly could and get out as fast as I could. And it put more strain on the body because, you're just in constant motion. But I just found it made it more bearable. I once flew for a meeting to Tokyo, and I did the whole thing in 42 hours, round trip, including my meetings and a dinner in Tokyo. And people think you're insane, but there's no time for jet lag. And I just didn't. I'd been to Tokyo maybe dozen and a half times. So I'd seen what I needed to see, and I would just get in, get out. So that's how I did business travel. So Lindsey, earlier in the show, we were talking about, and John referenced some viewer feedback that we touched the GameStop Robinhood story, but we didn't do it justice, perhaps. So I'd love your take on it. And I know it's now a week later and more twists and turns. And I know Hollywood's already planning a movie, but I'm going to play Elon Musk in the movie. But I wonder what your take is on the whole Robinhood, Reddit, GameStop, Bed Bath & Beyond story.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty incredible, and it's understandable that it's pretty confusing to retail investors, especially people that haven't really been introduced to the stock market before this. So there's some, what might be considered to these folks esoteric things going on with short selling and what's a short squeeze and a gamma squeeze. There's all these new terms, crazy terms being thrown out there. But I think the short story is this was a stock that it's a retailer that is primarily located in malls, losing money. There were some hedge funds with a lot of money that were betting against the stock and the company, assuming they were going to potentially eventually go out of business. And so the amount of people betting against the stock was a lot higher than the amount of people that were, positive, I guess, on the stock price. So because there were so many people short, exceeded the amount of stock available, it made it very easy to create what is a short squeeze. So if you can push the stock price up, people that own the stock short, which means they borrowed it and are going to have to buy it back to repay whoever lent it to them. Whenever the stock price goes up, that short person has to buy the stock at a higher price. And it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where the stock price just continues to move higher and higher because of that. And then you have like brokerage firms and other financial institutions that, are trying to manage their risk, which means they're going to have to buy. So those are the guys that are on the other side of the short trade that are supporting some of these bigger guys. So they have to go and buy the stock to make sure that their position is hedged and that they're not going to lose a ton of money as the stock price moves higher. It's a lot of convoluted, like confusing things going on. But the fact of the matter is when a stock moves that fast and that furious, whether they're short sellers or not, usually it doesn't last for that long. And especially doesn't last for that long when there's short selling going on. Like this stereotypical movement in a short sell is it moves higher when it's squeezed very quickly and then it comes down very quickly, which is exactly what we've seen in GameStop. I know today the stock is moving higher, but it's just if you've never sold options or you've never invested in the stock market, my take is stay away from these types of fast moving stocks that have weird, confusing things going on that you don't understand. It's just it's not worth it for you. If you were lucky enough to get in, you also have to be disciplined enough to sell it when you make a profit of, 20, 30%, or even doubling or tripling your money. If you bought the stock at $20, by the way, it's trading at like in the 60s today. So you still doubled your money. It could be worth taking profits there, but I don't know if I did a good job of clarifying that, but
I think so. Here's my question. What does this ultimately mean for a retailer like GameStop? I mean, does it matter in the long run?
What it means for them, it doesn't change their business at all. But what it can mean is they might be able to raise capital while their stock price is higher. They also, though, would be on the other side of if they were trying to sell themselves, because a lot of time laggard businesses try to sell their intellectual property or IP or different things like that. So if they were trying to do anything like that, that probably delayed that because they just, because investors in that type of business see the uncertainty in the stock and they're not going to pay for it if they don't think it's necessary. But fundamentally, it doesn't change the business. It really just changes their access to capital and other financial transactions that they might be seeking, given the position they're in.
And I think one of the other things that happened here is, in Lindsey, in your prior life at CFRA, which tracked corporate earnings for amongst the things that they do as an independent analyst firm. We decoupled the performance of a stock from its pricing from the actual underlying performance of the company. So GameStop is a business that's losing money and in some respects going out of business. We talked about it last week, and we likened it to Blockbuster Video in terms of it no longer being relevant for a lot of people. So that's a bit of a dying business. Blockbuster Video, Radio Shack, these brick and mortar retail platforms that didn't figure out a way to reinvent themselves for the business of the future. Yet the stock is doing incredibly well for a completely different set of reasons. And I think that that's what brings on the confusion, because I think the average retail investor thinks that a stock is going up in price because the company's doing well, which is generally the case. That's called fundamentals. But here they're completely decoupled and they have nothing to do with one another.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, I've been following the markets for a long time now. And what I would say is you need to understand that the stock, it will trade, stocks can trade on emotions and other crazy things at any given time, but it always has to come back to what the business does, the profits that they're making. Are those profits growing or are they shrinking? And if they're shrinking, usually that's not a good sign for the direction of the stock price. So it always comes back to that, what you said, fundamentals, profitability of a company. And that is, you know, why the stock market is an important mechanism for building wealth in general, is that overall, over a long period of time, if you invest in broader indices like the S&P 500 or things like that, the general trend is for earnings to move higher in an orderly fashion over time. And as such, stock prices of the stocks of the companies in that index should also do the same.
Along those lines, so if you look at the non-political headlines, there's still a lot of despair out there in the economy, so much so that the government is finding ways to create more stimulus and more help to get the economy sort of back to where it was. Yet the stock market is dancing around all-time gains. And maybe sort of in English for the folks who are listening that are interested in the stock market, if you can make sense of why we're coming out of a recession that was one of the worst since the Great Depression, and the stock market seems to be behaving in a completely different fashion.
Well, what you have to realize is that the stock market is a forward-looking mechanism. So while things right in the current moment might not be exactly perfect, you know, the jobs data has remained a little bit weak in the last couple months. There's a lot of unemployed people out there. There's a lot of concerns, but there's a lot of good things happening too. We're a lot further along through this pandemic. And like you said, we've already begun recovering from the recession. And the stock market is really looking 6 to 12 months down the line. And what the stock market sees is that we've got vaccines being given right now. There's a recovery that's going to eventually probably speed up. And that's going to bode well for economic activity, which means it's going to bode well for corporate America. The consumer, while the unemployment situation remains concerning, has more cash in the bank than they did, and they're more financially secure than they were going into this crisis. And so when the market sees all of that and what that could mean for the future of our economy, it's upbeat, it's positive, and that helps drive the market higher.
I just get so nervous when I look at my portfolio, and I probably look at it more often than I should. But I get so nervous because I'm like,
is that hourly?
Yeah,
is that hourly?
every day, probably, for sure. I just wonder, is this, everything's up. I mean, people are feeling pretty confident in general. I'm feeling pretty good about the market in general, but I'm like, at what point do I pull the trigger? And take some of these gains off the table. I always think about it too when it come tax time, because I'm like, okay, like I made a lot of transactions last year. I'm going to have a big tax bill this year. But so I start thinking, maybe I need to unload some of those gains. Like Amazon, my gain is 200% since I bought it. I mean, at what point do I unload some of that? I don't know. I know, Mitch, do you have any inside information for me? I don't know.
I'm going to tie your question, Lindsey's comments about GameStop, into an answer.
Perfect.
Which is, there are folks who have six-figure gains in GameStop. Last week, I got a call from, and literally it was last Friday, I got a call from our friend Jerry Willis over at Fox Business Network. And she calls me whenever she needs a college kid to do something. She calls me, and I reach out to my twins, and one of my son's fraternity brothers at University of Michigan in D-Sig profited from the GameStop trade. His sister got him into Reddit. He started reading it. He followed it for a week. He jumped in and he clipped off $100,000 plus gain.
Amazing.
So it's a great story. He borrowed money from his dad. He took all of his life savings and put it in it. It's like, it's a terrible story in some respects and a great story in other respects. But regardless, he has a tax bill in 2021. He has a short-term capital gain. Mm-hmm. It's possible the tax rates could go up. He's going to find himself in a tax bracket that he never imagined him being. He's got a six-figure gain. He's going to have a larger gain. He held on to a bunch of it, and I would have hoped that he would have sold it all, but he wanted to let some of his house money ride. So good for him. But let's say he has $200,000 in gains. That's going to put him in a completely different tax bracket at ordinary income rates. I think he lives in the state of Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. So he's going to have state and local taxes. He's going to have federal taxes. He could find himself having to write a check for $100,000 in tax. He didn't pay estimated taxes, most likely. So he could find himself with some interest and penalties. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal. It's today. So if you're listening to this next week, it'll still be out there. This is a big issue for this crowd, and they haven't focused on it yet. Day traders in general are used to this because they're making their income by trading securities. So they've gotten into the cadence of having to pay taxes on those gains, whether they be long-term or short-term. But for these people who were part of the Reddit army who jumped in for the first time, and this was their first foray into it, and they have this huge gain, I don't think they're prepared for it. So you used, Vera, the fact that you don't want to sell your Amazon stock that's up twofold or threefold because you don't want to pay taxes on that gain. At least you're thinking about it. I worry that these kids aren't even thinking about it.
No, yeah, I think you're right about this. And Lindsey, I've seen this on CNBC too. Over the last couple of days, they've been talking about the tax consequences, and people are going to be hit with a big tax bill and be like, what, huh? I didn't understand what. So I think the tax situation overall is going to be a mess in general because you have people moving in different states, working in different states, bouncing around. It's going to be a complete disaster, I think. Lindsey, what do you think for taxes for 2020? I mean, is it a disaster like everyone's saying it's going to be?
Yeah, I think so. And given the timing of this whole GameStop situation and speculation in the market and everything Mitch just talked about, I wouldn't be surprised to see people filing a lot more extensions this year. I think I'm with you. I think it's going to be a mess. Tax professionals are going to earn their keep this year. That is no doubt.
What is their liability on something like this that's so unorthodox? Like what a tax preparer, I've had tax preparers mess up, and I know there's a certain, what is the liability when you go to like an H&R Block?
You're responsible. You, the taxpayer, responsible. So
blaming the person who did your taxes for the reason why there's a mistake. You may have a civil action against them for malpractice. However, the taxpayer is still responsible. And in many cases, the burden of proof regarding the positions you took on your tax return is on the taxpayer and not on the IRS or the state or the city. You have to prove that you're correct.
I wonder who's going to get blamed for this, because we live in such a divisive environment, community right now. like who are the beneficiaries of these speculative trades that made, 6-digit plus winnings here, when I call it winnings because it's like a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
I feel like there's going to be finger pointing. Do we point, not to make it political, but do we point to the government? Do we point once again to the financial institutions? Who gets blamed for this?
A lot of people are blaming Robinhood.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And you know what's interesting
I
about
mean, it's insane.
Well, and listen, I think when we spin the wheel of blame, we're going to spin it multiple times. So we're not going to spin it once. It lands on Robinhood and we all say, yes, it's their fault. I think we're going to continue to spin the wheel of blame. However, pursuant to tax law, many times when you have windfalls in life, there's withholdings that are required as part of the windfall. And I don't want to get into the weeds on tax law, but the question may be down the road, which we can't implement now, but we'll learn from it, where the government imposes backup withholdings for certain kinds of stock transactions because we need to protect those investors so that at least they've paid some minimum taxes associated with it. So you open a brokerage account, you have a big win, you close the brokerage account. Maybe as part of that, there's some backup withholdings just to make sure that these people pay taxes. Because what I fear is these not my son's fraternity brother, but somebody's going to make $100,000, not pay estimated taxes, say I can do this again, put some of that money back into the market, lose some or all of it, and if they lose more than half of it, and their effective tax rate with state and local federal taxes is 50%, they may have no money to pay those income taxes, and they'll end up with nothing.
They'll work out a little payment plan with the IRS and pay like $20 a month or something. I know that I can see that happening.
I will make this prediction, and then we'll get some final thoughts around the horn and bid everybody goodbye. There's going to be a huge uptick in tax relief commercials that are targeted at young retail investors. Just like if you listen to the podcasts that have commercials, sadly, we don't have sponsors yet, but you'll notice that when Bitcoin was all the rage and you were listening to a podcast, there were a ton of Bitcoin dealer commercials embedded into podcasts because they thought that was the target demo. That target demo may be tax relief firms, because I think there's going to be a lot of kids that don't have the means to pay the piper. So, Lindsey, big picture, looking ahead at 2021 from your lens as being a stock market following guru, what do you predict for the stock market? Not percentages, but just directionally for 2021. Is this going to be an up year, or when all said and done, is it going to be a down year or a flat year?
I think it's going to be a good year. I think it'll be an up year when it's all said and done. I remain optimistic for a lot of the reasons I talked about here today. And I do think the one final comment on the GameStop situation is it has brought a lot of new investors into the market, and it's woken a lot of people up. And I think that's a really great thing for the market and for individuals. And now it's just about educating them and, helping them, holding their hand through the process so they become long-term investors, not just these short-term speculative investors. So I'm excited about what we could see happen there too.
Excellent. Well, we're going to leave it there, but we're going to have you come back because talking about the stock market is something that I believe our audience likes, and there's no better person to talk about the stock market, in my view, than Lindsey Bell. So, Lindsey Bell, greetings from Florida. I'm glad to see you landed safely in North Carolina, and thank you for joining us. John and Vera, as always, thank you. And to our audience, thanks for listening to the NoPo podcast, News Without the Noise.
In my mind, I'm gone to Carolina. Can't you see the sunshine? Can't you just feel the moonshine? Ain't it just like a friend of mine to hit me from behind? Yes, I'm gone to Carolina in my mind. Karen, she's a silver sun. You best walk her away and watch it shining. Watch her watch the morning come. silver